Wonderful. So hello everyone, this is Bristol Fundraising Group's session on how to make AI work for your fundraising, and it's a case study with Bristol Weston Hospitals Charity. So AI is fast becoming the new standard in non-profit fundraising. Our presenters today are Ben Robertson, who is the Business Development Manager at Dataro. This is a company that offers data prediction software, and Daryl Hornby, the Data and Insight Manager at Bristol and Weston Hospitals Charity. And they are going to talk us through about how Bristol and Weston Hospitals Charities journey with AI and how Dataro's donor prediction software has become an integral part of the charity's data practices and fundraising strategy, as well as delivering increased revenue across their fundraising program. So a huge thank you to Ben and Daryl for joining us today. And I am going to hand you over to Ben to kick off.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Sophie. And thanks for having us as well. It's really excellent to be here. Listen, to kick us off, what I'm going to do is share my screen and we can dive straight into introducing ourselves. So I'm going to start with me and then I'll pass over to Daryl. As Sophie said, I'm Ben. I'm the Business Development Manager here at Dataro. My experience in this sector includes working on fundraising events tech previously. So with the likes of the London Marathon, the Great North Run, and some of the biggest charities in the country as well. Now very much helping charities towards that point of using AI, or more specifically, machine learning in their fundraising. I thought it might be good to include a fun fact in here. My fun fact is that I once worked for a Formula One team. And I will hand over to Daryl, who I think has a good fun fact himself.
Which one?
Hi, so I'm Daryl Hornby. I'm currently the Data and Insight Manager at Bristol and Weston Hospitals Charity. I've been here now for 2.5 years, but I've worked in the charity sector for 18 years now, starting in finance now, sort of migrated into the data side of things over the last 7 or 8 years. And my fun fact is on a similar theme that I used to be a scout for a professional football academy.
Very sports related. Good fun fact, Daryl. I like that. And thank you very much for the introduction. What we'll do before jumping on to a bit of an agenda, I thought it might be good to share exactly who Dataro are and of course where we're coming from as well. So in essence, we're a software company. We work with about 260 non-profits globally at the moment, and our area of expertise is very much in helping charities extract more robust, more meaningful donor insights from their data through a targeted use of AI. So we started in about 2018, so long before AI was very much a buzzword. Our 3 co-founders were actually from Sydney, moved over to the UK in about 2021, 2022, and most recently we've embarked on our US fundraising journey. So one of the main things that I've learned about the US fundraising world is they don't refer to themselves as charities, which is really interesting. So that was certainly a learning curve for me. But in terms of our agenda today, this is what we've got planned. So first of all, am I late to the party? Second of all, and of course, touching on the application of AI, raising more and wasting less. We'll then, of course, hand over to Daryl to speak about the application of AI at Bristol and Weston, and of course, some of the exciting results that they've seen there too. As a last point, and maybe the most important point, we'll run through next steps and what's required to apply AI and machine learning in your specific fundraising programs moving forward. And as a sub point, of course, we'll finish off with some questions where you can ask myself or Daryl any questions that will pop up in today's session. But let's jump on with, am I late to the party? So why do fundraisers need AI? This is where we're going to start. Now, the first point is the demand on charities is increasing faster than ever. More people need the support that you actually offer. The second is the cost of delivering these services are essentially higher than they've ever been and are very much increasing faster than ever as well. Number 3, charities must now contend with enormous volumes of data, volumes which may exceed what even the most capable and talented data and insight teams could actually hope to manage. Number 4 is donors are actually expecting more. The one-size-fits-all approach to donor stewardship simply isn't tailored enough. They want personalization, they want tailored experiences, And essentially, if you don't give it to them, I'm sure another charity will. And finally, giving trends are very much changing, and the rate at which external factors are actually impacting fundraising behavior is very much quickening. And charities have to be agile and efficient in their response to this. So with all of those 5 points in mind, we need to apply tools, techniques, and approaches which are sophisticated enough to meet these challenges, and tools which can enable fundraisers to do more, do better, and do faster with the resources that they actually have available. And AI in its many forms offers the solutions that we're very much looking for here. And that's, of course, why we're talking about AI today. So the big opportunity in specifically individual giving. So by helping us understand the true meaning of our donor data, these technologies can unlock huge opportunities for fundraising. You can see a few there. So a better donor experience, raising more funds, wasting less money, automating analysis or segmentation, and doing more with less. But really, it's all about leveraging these tools to support and enhance the work that fundraisers are already doing. And in the same way that a hammer is useless without someone to actually use it, AI tools are unable to fulfill their specific function without the guidance of a person. And in this instance, if you like, that person is, of course, the fundraiser. And you can see here, we're talking about predictive AI, and that, of course, is machine learning. And when someone talks about predictive AI, they're talking about machine learning. When you hear machine learning, think pattern analysis in data. This is the analysis of patterns in data using incredibly sophisticated algorithms in order to predict future behaviors or future outcomes of supporters specifically in this instance. The other type of AI, of course, is generative AI. So when someone says large language model, actually think huge language model. This is an AI algorithm which has been trained on every page of Google, the entire contents of Google, and all of Shakespeare's books. It's got a very wide scope here. In terms of fundraising specifically, generative AI is often useful for creating instant first drafts of messaging or text for areas such as fundraising campaigns and appeals. So that's part 1 finished. And now we're going to jump on to part 2, which of course is raising more and wasting less. So by helping us understand the true meaning of our donor data, these technologies can help unlock huge opportunities for fundraisers. And you can kind of think of this in terms of 4 different questions. So as a fundraiser, when considering that massive donor data that most charities are often sitting on, you have to try and figure out the following. The first is who you should be communicating with. The second, when you should be doing so. The third, why we should be getting in touch. And finally, how you should be getting in touch as well. In essence, these are fundamental key questions to any successful fundraising program. Now, of course, the idea of trying to understand which donors we should be speaking to about what and when isn't new to fundraisers, but traditionally, the way we've actually selected donors has tended to be very time-consuming and not specifically accurate either. So we've essentially grouped masses of donors together into their specific segments due to the fact they share a few things in common. Think of your classic RFV strategy, which of course is recency, frequency, and value. These donors all joined via this campaign, gave gifts of this size, and do so once a year. The problem is that method doesn't allow us to treat donors like individuals, and it doesn't allow us to recognize that every donor's motivations will ultimately be slightly different to the next. It simply isn't a good enough process or approach to rely on for the success of our campaigns. So what I'll run through now is the difference between, I guess, segmentation or classic segmentation and machine learning predictions. So you can see here, in essence, RFV, recency, frequency, and value, just looks at the tip of the iceberg, and in turn ignores most of the useful data that's actually available within your database. But really, this all comes down to using your data to its full potential. You know, there's so much more that you can actually uncover in your database than using just your typical RFV methods. And that's exactly where machine learning comes in. So you can see here, we're actually breaking this data up into much more granular factors, which are actually below the tip of this iceberg. And this might be derived from your giving, communications, demographics, actions, and campaign data as well. All key sections, if you like, within your database. All of this data is then analyzed using machine learning to find these subtle but important patterns within it. And these are the exact patterns that allow us to predict the likelihood of behaviors in the future for your donors. A kind of caveat to this is a point to mention: no charity is going to have all of their data perfectly populated. You know, no one's going to have the age, the gender, the location, everyone. That doesn't matter. The point here is, whichever data you do indeed have, it's using that to its full potential. So following this, you can actually see here, machine learning, however, does allow us to treat donors like individuals. And this is by examining the unique interactions which each donor has had with the charity. And this is in order to predict the next best step for that donor moving forwards. And this takes into account everything from granular giving history, communications history, actions that donors have taken or haven't, to demographic information. And this allows us to look at entire databases and pinpoint the donors which are genuinely the best candidates for different types of fundraising activity. And that fundraising activity I will touch on a little further down the line. This even allows us to fill important gaps by inferring data points which are often fairly poorly captured. So things like date of birth. So Dataro's latest models, this is one of our newest developments, is we can actually estimate date of birth to around 10 years. And of course, that type of technology or model can be really useful with certain areas like legacy and major giving as well. But the real use case here is the ability to scale these predictions up across an entire database. So instead of having to rely on the broad brushstrokes, if you like, of manual segmentation, we can instead use machine learning to build lists of individuals who are the genuine best prospects to give things like major gifts, mid-value gifts, or indeed legacy gifts moving forwards too. So this is a much more effective way of ensuring you're targeting the right donors with the right asks and crucially at the right times as well. So far, so good, but how is all of this analysis, this insight, potentially presented back to the end user or the fundraiser at the charity? And this is a really important point. Half of this challenge when deploying sophisticated modeling techniques is that the output requires a PhD in data science to interpret. And that's no use indeed to most fundraisers. What we actually need are clear, easy to interpret outputs that we can very easily build campaigns around. And here's a really good example of this. So this is Dataro specific output. And what we're providing is individual ranks and scores for different types of fundraising behavior. And this, as you can see here, is assigned directly to the donor record. And all of this information will get updated weekly to account for new data as it would arrive in a database. So here you can see Maddie specifically, you can see when to ask, and that's now. Why to ask, a single gift. And you can of course see here how much to ask for as well. That's a specific tailored ask amount to Maddie through all of the machine learning modeling we're actually doing in the background. The key thing here, and we'll touch on this later on, you can see that she's 99% likely to give, which of course would be very exciting to any fundraiser to see. Now, here are 10 examples of the specific questions which machine learning can now accurately answer for you. So perhaps think of your roles as fundraisers and how they'd be enhanced if you could know with a high degree of confidence exactly who is the most likely to give in your next appeal, who's the most likely to cancel their recurring gift. I won't run through all of these, but these are some really good examples of where AI, and more specifically, predictive AI machine learning, can be used to help with your fundraising programs. Think about the time you'd save, how you could reduce wastage, and how the overall performance of these programs would be improved. So with all of this theory in mind that we just ran through there, how does better targeted communications, courtesy, of course, of machine learning, actually impact the performance of different fundraising programs? So you can see a few examples on the screen here. And all of these examples are with charities who have previously relied on traditional segmentation approaches before, of course, switching to the use of machine learning. However, instead of running through each case study individually, we're very lucky to have Daryl with us today. So instead of touching on other charities, I'm going to let Daryl speak about the specific use of AI at Bristol and Weston Hospitals Charity. So without further ado, over to you, Daryl.
Very much. Yes, so we are Bristol and Weston Hospitals Charity, and yes, we are here to improve the health and happiness of every patient cared for in our hospitals. And as I say, I've been with us now for 2.5 years in the data and insight manager role. So I want to talk you through sort of how we've used this AI tool to target donors, and some of the results from that. If you could move on to the next one for me, please, Ben. Thank you. So I'm going to run through some of the key learnings that we've had since adopting AI. The first one is self-explanatory, really lots of testing. So when we had the machine learning attached to our database, we were seeing these scores, trying to understand sort of how that algorithm was working. Quite frankly, it was a little bit too complicated for my brain and my skills. So what we looked to do was, look at those top people from that machine learning who that's identified, and see if it made sense. Do those people give regularly? Are the people that we're familiar with? And absolutely at the very top, they were. As you go down that list, you start to think, okay, this is an interesting selection. How do we find out how to contact these people? The machine learning is telling us that it's looking at what they've done in the past to give us an idea of what they might do in the future and how that can help us. And to do that, we had to build a bit of trust within that data set, and which we did by checking those top people. And I'm going to go slightly out of order here. And we kind of had to be brave in terms of, yes, there might be some people that we think, actually, we wouldn't have identified these as potentially given to this appeal, but the top scorers do make sense. So let's give it a go and see, what that can do for us. And in terms of defining your goals, I think the key for us was to be realistic. Our approach was to target fewer people than we were doing based on recency RFV, but target more specifically, which enabled us to really focus on getting that income rather than chasing multiple people to a lot of expense in some cases. So go to the next slide, please, Ben. Okay, and here's some of the results that we had initially. So as you can see, this is based on our Christmas appeal last year. the images are there for you to see. The gross income wasn't actually higher than it was previously. However, we were able to target far less people, which naturally reduced the expenditure. We were able to mail in-house as well, which was really handy, having the people power to do that. And naturally, the ROI was extremely high. And actually, what we found was that the people who were given at much higher rates as well. So we did pretty well in terms of an average gift in there. But we didn't stop there. So we tried, if we go to the next slide, please, Ben. We tried it again for our newsletter in 2024. Again, this was with a direct ask. So the numbers significantly lower than the previous year. But again, the response rate was extremely high. And again, we were able to do that in-house to really bring that expenditure down and drive the net income up with another really successful ROI. And in terms of the next steps, now we've tested that on individual giving, we're looking to sort of identify more areas that we can develop similar practices. So particularly major and mid-level giving, looking at those who are likely to give a little bit higher or potentially convert from individual giving into those mid-level spaces. So we're testing that out right now with specific journeys. Similarly with our convert to RG model now, we're looking at a handful of people pretty much every month now in every campaign, around 50 a month now to try and convert that to RG. That's been going on for 2 months, so we're not really showing the results yet. So we'll hopefully be able to see that come to fruition in future. And we're also supporting on machine learning for MailChimp as well, which is hopefully going to predict those people who are likely to opt out from hearing from us as well, which could really help with those supporter journeys in the future.
Thank you very much, Daryl. That's really exciting to hear. And I guess a tangent to everything that Daryl's mentioned there, we've got a really exciting case study on Dataro's website, which outlines the work between Dataro and Bristol Weston Hospitals Charity. The key stat there, and it relates to the first case study, I believe, Daryl, is that we increase appeal revenue by 161% together using those AI predictions, which is really exciting. So if I remember at the end of this call, I will pop that case study in the chat. It's well worth a read. So what we're going to jump onto now is the final section of our presentation today. And this is part 4 and next steps of maybe getting started, of course, with AI. So really, I think the first thing to do here is to define the problem or challenge that you actually want to solve with AI. Number 2 is understanding the opportunities and the benefits of each AI technology. And number 3 is getting team consensus for using AI and actually understanding that impact moving forwards as well. Of course, developing guidelines for usage, predictive AI and generative AI are both used for very different types of fundraising, as we've touched on today. So it's essential to understand the difference between the two when you're selecting the use of both. A few questions that you can actually ask yourselves on top of this are things like, are we truly ready and resourced? Do we have the right people, the plans, and the data in place? But ultimately, the more data, the better the targeting and personalization moving forwards. Now, I guess the key areas here that you might look to have predictions for on the screen here. So this is via the analysis that machine learning can do, and of course, via the integration with the charity's database as well. And really, this allows us to accurately answer a number of questions, which are, I'd say, fundamental to the growth and success of fundraising programs moving forward. So the question I'd be asking here is, which of the solutions that you can see on the screen there best align with your specific fundraising goals? For example, in 2025, is your goal, much like Bristol Weston, for example, to grow your regular giving program? In that case, you would be able to align this specific KPI with a convert to monthly segment you can see here. Much the same, if your goal was to grow your kind of pot of mid-level givers, you'd be using the mid-level segment there. So that's how we can get granular within each of the different programs. But the very first step here to be able to do this would be connecting with a charity's database. And that's so as a whole, you can review all of the data that's logged within there. So depending on a charity's CRM, there's a number of different ways in which you can actually use this technology. So the first is through an automated data transfer, and that's via what we'd call an API, of course. The second would be an automated transfer via an agent. The third would be a secure file transfer protocol. And the fourth, an easy file upload process. With most CRMs, I'd probably say the first port of call would be through the use of an API, which is a little more automatic. And in this case, this would be with CRMs like Razor's Edge, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Microsoft Dynamics, and Salesforce as well. But we've seen that even if two charities have the exact same CRM system, we know that data can be tagged completely differently. So to mitigate this point, as part of the onboarding process, we always do what we call tagging. And that's where we'd align the data points in a charity's CRM with those that actually go into the machine learning process. And this is a really essential part of understanding your data and ensuring the modeling process knows where gifts are coming from. So the key output here of all of the back of this concept is ranks and scores for each and every donor within your database. So this rank and score would be available in both the Dataro side of things, but more useful, the charity-specific database. And that's via the API that could be going between the two. Of course, you don't want to be scrolling through thousands of supporter records to view their ranks and scores, as this wouldn't be time efficient. So instead, what charities tend to do is to build lists using these ranks and scores as custom fields in their CRM. And this is indeed possible, as I mentioned before, within CRMs like Razor's Edge, Microsoft Dynamics, and Salesforce as well. So the last slide from me is a bit of a summary of today's session. Now, number one is AI is very much here to stay. Number two, which is very important, is there are different types of AI. And today we, of course, specifically ran through the difference between generative and predictive AI as well. Number three, it, of course, makes us or helps us to make the most of our data. Number four is predictive AI can harness great value, as ultimately that leads to more money being raised. And the last one is you can start right now, and maybe you can consider today as very much being the start of your AI journey. But the last thing to say is thank you very much. If you'd like to get in touch with me, of course, we can answer questions very shortly, but my email is there on the screen. So please feel free to get in touch if you wish. But otherwise, I will hand back to Sophie. I'm sure there might be some questions from the wider team.
Thank you so much, Ben and Daryl. That was really interesting. Lots of kind of food for thought. We will certainly go and have some, we'll go to questions now. Ben, would you mind just stopping sharing your screen so that we can see everybody?
Yes,
fantastic, and both of you two are pinned. That's brilliant. I'm going to quickly go to a question in the chat that is completely not related to your presentation, but I just think it has to be asked. Zoe Fusel is asking, I'd love to know which Formula One team. Big fan here. So I just feel like we should start that one off, Ben.
That's a great question. Unfortunately, it's an F1 team that's no longer around anymore. It was a team called Caterham F1. So I'd say it was back in maybe 2013. They were a green car on the grid. You might have to have a look on Google or something like that.
Brilliant, thank you. I mean, this means nothing to me, so I hope Chloe, that might have meant something to you. Brilliant. So thanks ever so much both for your presentation. Really, really interesting. What we'll do now is we'll open the floor for questions. So if anybody has any questions that they would like to ask Ben or Daryl, please feel free to raise your hand, or you can pop them in the chat box as well, and then I'll read them out. I'm going to start with a question, if that's okay. Ben, I think it's coming to you, this question, but Daryl as well, feel free to answer too. I think being kind of new to using AI and starting to introduce it in our fundraising practices, personally, I'm forever hearing that, especially with the use of generative AI, ChatGPT, that I need to not put any sensitive data through it. It's not safe. It's going to be shared. How does it differ using a system like Dataro on a database? Are we guaranteed that our data is completely safe and it's not going to be shared with anybody else? Are there any concerns we need to be aware of?
That's a really, really good question. An important point too. I'd probably say that there's different considerations with things like generative AI and predictive AI as well. If we're looking at the predictive side of things, which is where we would be sort of looking at all of the data in your database, a key point to bear in mind here is the data that we'd actually be looking at would be non-identifiable data. And that would be the data that's kind of moving into the broader data set, if you like. We have a very, very structured, I'm sure other companies do too, a very structured GDPR system in place, if you like. And in terms of when you're starting discussions with Dataro, that's a key part of the process and a really important, I guess, step to cover before progressing any further as well. Hopefully that answers your question, Sophie.
Thank you, Ben. Carol, did you have anything you wanted to add to that? Any thoughts you had when you entered into the process of using AI to help with your data?
It's naturally one of the biggest questions, especially if you know, your managers and your trustees, etc., who are going to approve the spend in this case. I think the main part is that you really have control over how it gets shared and when it gets shared as well. And what you see back from Dataro is very limited information about the individual. As we only see a first name, so there's only a first name and an ID linked to our database, so they can only see very, very limited information, but lots of, as Ben said, non-identifiable information that sort of feeds back through those systems.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go to Alex, who's got her hand up first. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you. This question is for Daryl. I was just wondering, in terms of the testing that you've done with IG donors, was there anything that stood out in terms of the demographic or the data where, you know, it might have surprised you, or it was a specific group of people where that's how you kind of cut it down to those donors to reach out to?
The most interesting bit was being able to sort of cross-sell a little bit more. So it might be people that have given to community in the past, or, you know, lots of different avenue streams within the charity that ordinarily we wouldn't have picked as a target for individual giving, because we're very, as a lot of charities were in the past, sort of, they've given to individual giving before, so that is the journey that they will go on, and that is the type of ask that we're going to make. So be able to spread that net a little bit and, you know, work with different teams a little bit more has definitely been interesting for our fundraising team.
Thank you, Daryl. I'm going to hop over now to a question that's in the chat. Again, it's for you, Daryl, but maybe on a wider scale, Ben, too. This is from Alex Davies. I'd love to know how, before implementing AI into your day-to-day fundraising, if there were any discussions internally about the huge environmental impacts and wider ethical issues of using AI, and how you balance that against the clear benefits of your fundraising income. So I think probably both of you would like to answer this question.
Yeah, I'll go first. I think the main thing was using predictive AI instead of generative AI initially. Again, just to make it, we knew we weren't necessarily sharing people data with third parties, so that was the key thing there, to make sure that it was all really clear that the information that we were sharing was extremely limited and not transferable back to the individuals. And I think a lot of fundraisers are the same. I'm in data, so it's a lot different for myself. The use of generative sometimes potentially feels a little bit less personal, and they really want to get those messages across. So I think expanding into that and potentially using that as templates will make it feel a lot more personable, effectively. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Daryl. Ben, have you got anything to add, specifically about the kind of environmental considerations and ethics considerations?
Done it again. I was on mute. I was just saying, I thought Daryl summarized that very well. And I think that specific question is maybe more relevant to generative AI than predictive. It's still important for both, but in terms of, I guess, the ethical issues of AI, more the generative side of things. What I've seen more widely is some charities might, definitely not with every charity, but they might have a very broad AI policy, and that'll be defining the routes that they might be taking moving forwards and the different areas they need to consider as well. So that's something that I've experienced in my role.
Thank you both. Okay, I've got another question in the chat, and this is from Jake Wilson. This sounds very useful for warm donors and donors with lots of data already collected. How would you apply this technology, if you can, to a cold appeal or to donors with little data gathered already? Thank you.
That's a really good question, Jake. So the key point to mention here is you're absolutely right. What we'd be doing from a Dataro perspective is looking at those warm donors. So anyone in a charity's database that has given at least one gift in the past. And I guess the key reason for that is we know that the cost of supporter acquisition these days is extremely expensive. I think we did some research. It was about £250 per supporter acquired. So in turn, instead, the key area that we're looking at here is maximizing the lifetime value of those supporters you have in your database. I guess a sneak preview for Dataro, I don't even know if I've told Daryl this yet, but we're working on a model that should be released in the new year that is going to be non-donor to donor. So looking at those colder supporters and how we can convert them into giving a gift of any type, if you like. So yeah, Jake, a very, very timely question, that one.
Thanks, Ben. Did you want to add anything extra? No worries if you don't.
Not loads to add, really. I think the initial stages are quite interesting. So, the people who's given one, so the second gift, and seeing those creep up and knowing the algorithms are sort of figuring out based on what they've given to or any demographics that they've got.
Yeah.
It really can change those rankings. So it's interesting.
Thank you. I've got another question, and Daryl, I think this is probably more for you, but then if you want, if you've got examples from other charities you've worked with, then great. What do you think the key errors you maybe made while starting to implement this system in your database? Is there anything now, looking back at it, you wish you'd known before you started? Maybe with the fact, with how clean the data was, or to do with the tagging system. Was there things you wish you'd maybe invested in getting set up ahead of getting involved in using something like Dataro? What things could smaller charities start to do to get their data ready?
The cleansing is probably the most important part, I would say, when you first join, and ensuring that gifts are represented consistently as well. So, for example, one of the mistakes we made was some of the historic regular gifts were down as cash gifts from several years ago, and that that impacted a few of those rankings in there. So once we've cleaned the database up after that fact, it tidies those rankings up a little bit, and it makes a lot more sense in terms of what we're going to be able to go out and ask them for, because the calculations are a lot clearer. So I think just making sure that, especially, the specific financial gifts are represented accurately is the key part there.
That's really interesting, because I had a second kind of follow-on question about what you do if you have kind of dud data. Let's say you've inherited some information, you know very little about the previous giving history, but you do know that there was a gift, but you've no idea how it was given. Is it better to completely exclude that data in the process? Maybe Ben can answer this, or is it something that can still be used, or is it going to now give kind of inaccurate responses?
I'd still say that that's useful data. That might be slightly controversial, but the reason being, when we're looking at a database as a whole, let's say that you've got a donor that doesn't have extensive giving history. What we can do is there might be patterns and trends that do indeed align on the data that they do have. It might be, 3 or 4 data points, for example, with other donors in your database. So that's where we can begin to make sense of that data. I guess the flip side of things as well, we can begin to look at our broader Dataro data pool, which is like our foundational model. So if there's certain gaps maybe in your data, we can bridge that gap using our foundational model. And that's the de-identified combination of all of the data from all of the organizations that we work with combined into one. That foundational model, for especially those rarer giving types too, that's what makes the predictions so powerful. So yeah, that's another tangent to that point, Sophie.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move back to a question now in the chat, and this is from Pippa. Pippa would like to know how this could potentially be applicable to fundraising from trusts and foundations. We've touched on individual giving, large amounts of data for a large number of individuals. How would this work with trusts or corporates, for example?
It's a really good question. My initial answer there would probably that it would be the generative AI side of things rather than the predictive side. There might be uses for predictive, but that's my immediate answer. So maybe for writing things like various letters and things that you might be doing there, that's when you can use fundraising specific generative AI tools to save time and make those as tailored as possible. That's my initial thoughts there.
Thanks, Ben. Daryl, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I think the AI could potentially be used for analysis historically to see sort of what they've given to you previously, if they've given to specific areas. It's not built into the model that we use, but if you've got a team that's capable of building some quite simple, well, say simple, a much more dumbed down version of than this level, then absolutely it's possible. But I would say you need a person who's quite proficient in coding.
Okay, which I would imagine the majority of the smaller charities on this call probably don't have. But thank you, Daryl. That's really great. So I guess a secondary question from me on that is, how many individuals do we need on our database to make this a worthwhile exercise? Are we talking hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands? What's a good starting point?
Great question. Our kind of benchmark level, and this isn't, I wouldn't say this is set in stone, because it really depends on the number of financial supporters you have, right? But what we'd say for a total number of records in a charity's database, we'd recommend having a minimum of 10,000 records, and that's in a charity's CRM. So as I said, that's kind of the benchmark, but that isn't absolutely defining.
Thank you. Has anybody else got any questions that they would like to ask either Ben or Daryl? We've still got 10 minutes left. So if anybody has any more questions, please pop your hands up or feel free to pop it into the chat.
Even if they're Formula One related, that's absolutely fine.
I think I'd be really interested as well to see how this could work. Daryl, you mentioned looking at your kind of MailChimp integration and looking at the potential new supporters, you know, before maybe they have given, or how they interact with your comms. I think that's a really interesting approach as well. I'd be really interested in the future to hear how you found that as well.
Yeah, we're very excited to test it, and you know, it just shows that there's a lot more, rather than just focusing on specific income as well. You know, you can use targeted campaign, you can use it for even budgeting, forecasting for next year. So it doesn't always necessarily need to relate to income.
Yeah.
I think that's the key part that people might be able to take away, is actually there is some quite simple AI tools that are built into some programs that you use every day that can help you with those things, and you don't need to have a degree in coding or, you know, be a data manager as such, like I am.
Brilliant. Okay, well, if there are no other questions, I want to thank you both so much for coming and sharing your expertise with us. It's been really interesting, and there's definitely some things I'm going to take away and have a think about, as I'm sure there will also be lots of people on this call. So huge thank you. Ben, if you're happy to share your slides, maybe the couple which has some of the data on it, I'm sure that people would be interested in looking at them. If you're happy with that, we can forward those to everybody that's been on the call today. But yeah, massive thank you from me, and yeah, goodbye everybody.
Thank you very much, Sophie, and thanks everyone for joining. It's been really great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Bye.